So in Meditations 6, Descartes talks about the distinction between the mind and the body. I said in the last video that mind and body are distinct for Descartes. I've said this multiple times, but he subscribes to something called substance dualism, which is the idea that the mind and the body are distinct things and that humans, i.e. us, are composed of mind and body. However, he's very clear in this meditation, the sixth, that we're mostly our mind. Okay, so this is where page 28, column 1, where we get this idea of mind-body dualism, substance dualism. I possess a body with which I am very intimately conjoined, yet because on the one side I have a clear and distinct idea of myself as much as I am only a thinking and unextended thing, and as, on the other, I possess a distinct idea of body, inasmuch as it is only an extended and unthinking thing, it is certain that this I, that is to say my soul, by which I am what I am, is certainly and absolutely distinct from my body, and can exist without it. So recall that one of his goals was to show that the soul is distinct from the body, and that is immortal. So he goes on in this section to talk about why we think, why we can know we have a body. How do we know this? Okay, well, I think you guys already know the answer to that. It seems that we have a body. We have this distinct idea that we have a body. We feel hunger, we feel pain, we feel our hands, and we see our hands. And God is not a deceiver. If it turned out we didn't have a body, then it would seem like God's a deceiver. And that's problematic because he's not one. So because God exists, and we remember at the end of the last meditation, he was like, because God exists, I can get some other knowledge. All right, we have a pretty good sense that we have a body. God wouldn't deceive us, so we probably have a body. Or we have a body, no probably about it. Right? This is also where he distinguishes between nature and light of nature. Where nature here is page 29, column 2. I take nature in more limited signification than when I term it the sum of all things given to me by God, since in this sum many things are comprehended which only pertain to mind, and to these I do not refer in speaking of nature. Okay. He goes on to say about the body, that we are just kind of lodged in it as pilots, we just control it, and that the body exists in such a way it should just kind of tell the mind what will harm it, what will be beneficial to it, and that it's actually the body that's a source of a lot of errors, because our senses can be deceived. What the body does can be misled, and the body wants certain things in it that could harm the mind, and we just have to distinguish between the two. He's this discussion about how nerves work, how pain works. That's pretty interesting. If you want to talk about that, we can. But basically, the nature of man, inasmuch as it's composed of mind and body, cannot be otherwise than sometimes a source of deception. And this is page 32, first column. And he's basically saying, look, if we were just a mind, it'd be so easy to avoid deception. But we're not. We're a mind and a body. And this body can be easily deceived, because all it does is kind of indicate to the mind when it should do something, shouldn't do something, what would be good for it, what would be beneficial for it. And it really can't do the sorts of things the mind can do in terms of judging and acquiescing. It just does what it does. This is what he says, page 32, column 2, last sentence. But because the exigencies of action often oblige us to make up our minds before having leisure to examine matters carefully, we must confess that the life of man is very frequently subject to error in respect to individual objects, and we must in the end acknowledge the infirmity of our nature. So basically, you rely on the body to send sensations to the mind. And the body has no capacity for like distinguishing between error and not error, or truth and not truth. It just conveys these sensations to the mind. It's up to the mind to make sense of that information, but it's reliant on the body to give it that information. And the body doesn't have the ability to distinguish. It doesn't have the ability to resist through will, like a bad judgment, for instance. And yet, we get inputs of all sorts to the body that the body then sends to the mind, and then the mind has to act, has to do something in response to this information. And often, just due to like our limited nature and time constraints and things like that, we err. And there doesn't seem to be a way around that, except to avoid assenting to beliefs we don't see clearly and distinctly.